The 12th City, otherwise known as the City of Creeps. It's gotten that name for a few reasons, and those reasons drastically change depending on who you ask. Ask someone outside of 12 and they'll tell you the city itself is cursed or home to psychos. The rumors are more than enough to make people think that 12 is, home to the mentally ill or just improper. Problem is, I don't think they're entirely wrong. See, you ask anyone in 12 why they call it the City of Creeps, and you'll hear something along the lines that has to do with their rules. But you know what? I think it's better to explain with my own experiences and with some list. I grew up in City 9, one of the more luxurious cities as it lay on the southern coast of the country and was a major hub for trade, tourists, and entertainment. City 9 was pretty dreamy, if you were financially stable, and for me that wasn't so. My parents were both wage slaves who barely scraped by to support themselves, let alone me. They always liked to push the idea of me becoming a supportive member of the family, even at a young age, becoming obsessively so during that point. It started to drive a wedge between us. I still don't think it ever recovered. Now, don't get me wrong. I love them and still do, and I certainly tried my best to help. Lemonade stands, selling stuff at school. I did whatever I could think of to get some money when I was younger, but it never seemed to be enough for them. It made me feel useless. I dropped out of high school when I was 16 so I could work full-time. I was lucky enough to find work for a newspaper, but my pay wasn't the best, nor were my hours great. They had me run deliveries on my bike. I enjoyed it. I always enjoyed moving around and getting outside, that kind of stuff. So growing up with little to no money to my family's name and a worsening relationship with my parents, I had to find a place in another city where it was cheaper to live and offered a decent paying job. But there's an issue with trying to move to another city, and that's the fact you need to apply for transfer. Something that takes money. Except, of course, for one city. I'm sure you can tell where this is going. Good old 12. See, 12 has always had an issue with not having enough working class people, so they made applications and transfers to their cities free. On the surface, it sounds like heaven, but you'd be pressed to find a single individual in any city that did not find the mere mention of that place as somewhat off-putting. A wife's tale used to scare children to act right, else they'd be sent there and never seen again. A story where every denizen of that city is mentally deranged and likely to kill you. A holding pen for the world's worst kinds of people. The funny thing is, the first one might not be entirely wrong. Another transfer to the city is never seen again. People doubt the city even exists. Some claim it's a secret government project or, something like that. It certainly doesn't help that the 12 only made contact with other cities on the 19th of every month. Messages, phone calls, any other form of online contact beginning at 8 a.m. and ceasing immediately at 9:59 on the dot. Every month, 12 would post new job listings and housing. You couldn't find anything better than what the city offered. The 12 was located in a lush forested valley surrounded by sprawling hills and mountains, a place you think would be a popular tourist attraction or at least camping site, but few ever dared to go despite the apparent beauty of it. I wonder why. My 18th birthday was on June 16th, 3 days before 12 had sent out or accepted job housing listings on the 19th, and my parents were getting ready to kick me out of the house to save on costs. Despite all of the stories, I found myself keen on a job listing for a newspaper delivery man. It paid nearly 3 times as much as it did for the same job I did in 9. I could easily afford to live on my own in the listed housing there. The newspaper was a pretty big deal in 12 according to the job description, which at the time didn't really seem too bad or off, but I guess I was just young and naive. The hours were a bit strange as the workday start at 9 a.m. instead of 7:30 like in 9. Some days were mandatory to work, which didn't seem too off, figuring their already strange schedule. At least it didn't make it seem any more weird. I just figured that 12 liked to keep their schedules tight and consistent. In truth, I wasn't completely sold on the idea, but when I told my parents about it, or about my consideration to moving to 12, it kind of sealed the deal. My dad spoke to me as if we had never had any bad blood or heated arguments between us. I knew he loved me, but he certainly didn't show it in any way where it felt like he appreciated anything that I tried doing, no matter how hard I worked. I'm proud that you're taking the initiative to be a productive member of society and get a chance to live a more comfortable life than we could, Tyron," my father said to me after I proposed my idea to him. I also just completely forgot to neglect that my name is actually Tyron, but I guess you'll see that a little bit later in the story as well. I could just barely make out a hint of envy in their voice, but I like to think he was genuinely proud. My mother even chipped in with her happy little statement. "It'll be wonderful knowing that you'll be able to support yourself and we won't have to worry about you." All I heard, in other words, is they were glad, possibly even quietly upset, that I would be gone. That they wouldn't have their little burden at home to complain to or tell them how much they're not helping. So on the very night of my birthday, I applied for the newspaper delivery position in 12. I knew I wouldn't hear back from them until the 19th, so the following days were, at best, tense. There was always an atmosphere of awkwardness whenever I was in the same room as my parents. I ended up calling my work and resigning only a day before I was supposed to receive news from 12. Looking back, it was pretty unprofessional as it only gave them a day to find someone new, and I didn't even know if I'd be able to transfer yet or I'd get the job. To be honest, I was both thrilled and terrified to think about living in 12. What if the stories were true? What if some crazed lunatic was going to murder me in some horrific way as soon as I arrived there? At the time, I think it was all the tension between me and my parents that convinced me to go. I love my parents, but to me, 9 was just a reminder of a stressful childhood and a place where I couldn't see myself with a future. I knew my parents probably hoped I'd be caring enough to send them money when I was on my own. As much as we argued and didn't see eye to eye, I never planned on abandoning them. So I told them I'd send them money once I was stable and had some extra. When the 19th finally came, I received a phone call exactly at 8 a.m. I was just waking up, and I remember slapping myself awake just to answer the call as energetically as I could. My face stung as I heard the voice of a rather old man begin to speak. "Hello, is this Tyron?" he said with an oddly welcoming tone. That kind of tone that sort of put you off for a second, but I shrugged it aside, figuring it was just trying to be friendly. "Yeah, this is him. Who is this?" I responded with the most awake voice I could put on. "My name is Arkin, the supervisor of newspaper service in City 12. I wish to know if you still intend to transfer here for the job." Hearing those words, my chest was filled with a sense of accomplishment I had never felt before, despite the fact I didn't actually do anything except apply for a job. Yes, of course. What do you need me to do for that?" I managed to stammer out in my childish excitement. "Please have your belongings and be at the central bus station ready to board at the shuttle to City 12 at 11 a.m. sharp. If you are late, the shuttle will leave without you," Arkin said in one of the sternest voices I've ever heard. Maybe it's an old guy thing, I have no idea. It looked like 12 ran a tight schedule by how he spoke. "Alright, I'll be there on time. Thank you, sir, but, what about housing?" I asked, realizing I wouldn't have any money to immediately afford the housing there, which hadn't crossed my mind. I felt pretty embarrassed and stupid not to think about that beforehand, but I guess I found my concern quickly settled as Arkin spoke again. "Don't worry about that. The city will cover your expenses until you can support yourself." Arkin sounds like a generous grandfather the more I think about it. It's kind of heartwarming to hear. Instead of just pretentious complaining from, a certain individual. "Right, thank you. I'll see you then, sir," I said in probably a pretty childlike voice looking back, and I guess I just couldn't hide my excitement, if not mixed with a little bit of fear. Without another word, Arkin disconnected the call. I figured he had other things to attend to and organize, so I didn't put much thought into it. I was just happy to be getting out of 9 and into a new life. I rushed to inform my parents the news, and they predictably seemed equally as excited as I was to hear it. We didn't have a car, and it's about an hour's walk to the central bus station from our apartment block, so I immediately began packing what little possessions I owned, and I left after that. I never stopped to think about how rushed it all felt. I got a call in the morning and would be leaving the same day only a few hours later. I only got to quickly say goodbye to my parents before I rushed out the door with my things, and maybe that's all I ever needed to do to them. I remember arriving at the central station around 10:46-ish. I didn't have much on me at the time except for a few pairs of old clothes and some hygiene products. I didn't exactly know what to expect. I quickly ran my deal with customs and headed for the waiting area for the shuttles to 12. Not to my surprise, The waiting area was pretty small compared to the others, since 9 only ever sends shuttles for pickups once a month. It didn't even have a drop-off line. I may have been young then, but I was an idiot, or at least I was smart enough to realize I wasn't going to be coming back home anytime soon. I sat there with 3 other people for a few minutes as I waited for the shuttle to arrive. I figured it would have been here before me, so I was surprised to see it only arrived 5 minutes ahead of the scheduled time it was supposed to leave. The shuttle itself was small, maybe about 10 people for capacity. A new coat of paint wouldn't have hurt it either, as its silver appearance was looking faded or scratched in more places than one. It was probably just left to sit in the sun when it wasn't in use for the rest of the month. Despite its dodgy look, I didn't hesitate to jump on and take my seat. The driver, a middle-aged woman, probably anywhere between late 50s, early 60s, eyed each and every one of us as we boarded. Nothing malicious, it just felt odd. She looked at us as if to ask why we would go to 12. Not in the sense that she was curious about why we made that decision, but what would happen because we made it. I took a seat in the back, and everyone else picked random seats around the shuttle. One of the other guys actually sat directly in front of me. I suppose my curiosity got the better of me, and I was wondering about why others would want to go to 12 despite the stories. I lightly tapped him on the shoulder to get him to turn around. He looked like he was in his early 20s, maybe 22, 23, based off appearance. He had neatly combed dirty blonde hair, tiny brown freckles that dotted his nose and face, glasses that rested a little too far down in his nose, and a light skin that looked full of life. However, I almost immediately caught myself staring at a burn scar that covered the entirety of his right cheek. Something he quickly picked up on, but didn't discourage me from doing so. Figured he would be used to it by that point. "Can I help you?" he said after a few awkward moments of silence staring at his scar. He spoke in a quiet, almost timid voice. It was kind of funny, and I still don't know why to this day. "Yeah, sorry. I was just curious as to why you were heading to 12. It's fair to assume you've heard the stories, so why go? Is it for the money, or..." I said in response after quickly snapping out of my invasive onlooking. "Well, I just don't feel like I have a place here in 9. Life hasn't been the kindest to me here, and I just figured 12 could give me something better. I never really believed the stories anyway. Even if it is some sort of trap or killing ground for murderers, I'd rather take my chances with that than anything here." I didn't need to hear any more from him to get an idea of what he was going through, or had gone through. "Well, I guess that makes sense. Sorry if I bothered you," I said, intent on leaving the conversation at that, but I guess I piqued his curiosity as well. "Oh, it's fine. But what about you? Why are you going to 12? He looked in my duffel bag as to examine what kind of wealth I had. I think he got the picture. I told him the story of my childhood, my parents, pretty much everything. I didn't feel the need to hide anything, as what difference would it make if I didn't? I thoroughly enjoyed talking to him about it, but I felt like we had something in common. The whole getting away from something so that just maybe we could have a better life. So what's your name?" I asked him after telling him my story. "Gyron Telcolo. You?" he responded. "Tyron Sisa. Nice to officially make your acquaintance. I feel like I should have said my name sooner in the story. Oh well." I chuckled after saying, as I felt like we should have said our names sooner. He had a small smile on his face. It was nice to think I could already be making a friend, since that wasn't something I really got a chance to do in 9. Wasn't the most social of people in school. I asked him what job he applied for, and he told me he was going to 12 because one of the farmers in the cities had a vertical farm. I found it pretty fascinating when Gyron told me about how much he loved plants. He used to be a gardener for some rich family, taking care of their mini plants over the estate, picking flowers, fruits, vegetables, trimming bushes, that kind of stuff. I don't think either of us noticed when the shuttle actually started moving, because that still perplexes me to this day. I looked out the window thinking we were still at Station 9, but Gyron seemed just as confused as I did when I pointed it out. "When did we start moving?" I asked as I looked out the window at the passing landscape. We'd already gotten out of City 9, which made no sense because traffic at this time of day was always terrible. There's no way we could have been talking for that long. "I'm not sure. I guess we just didn't notice it. I mean, I'm not complaining, it gets us there faster, but it's certainly weird," he said in the tone of voice just as confused as mine. Not having any other explanation, I accepted his as the truth. I looked at the other 2 passengers in the shuttle with us. Another girl, I guess, looked about my age, sat in the front, while a rough-looking man, I assumed to be in his early 40s, sat in the middle row. It was clear they overheard our conversation, since they too were looking out as if they didn't know how far we'd gotten either, let alone when the shuttle even left. I wanted to ask them if either of them noticed it, but decided not to bother them since I figured they'd ask us if it bothered them enough. I made it a goal of mine to look out the window as much as possible, and I couldn't tell you why I felt like I needed to, but to me it just felt like I'd miss something if I looked away. We were in that shuttle for about 30 minutes until I realized that the passing view, it never changed. It was the same flat, grassy surroundings with what must have been 12 in the background, as I could see the forested covered mountains, but I had been looking out that window for the entire time. Maybe I was just checking the window too frequently, or maybe it was just some weird sense of deja vu, and I was about to ask everyone else if they had the same feeling, but everyone else was asleep. Gyron, the girl, the older guy, everyone but me and the driver, for obvious reasons. Gyron was just awake a minute ago, and I knew that for a fact because I had just glanced at him. He was reading a book when I looked at him, and then he was out cold. His book was in his bag. There was no way he could have moved without me noticing and not have made a noise, but somehow he did. I looked at the other two, and it looked like they had been sleeping for a while. I didn't have a phone or watch on me, so I had no way of telling the time, and to be honest, I was starting to have a bit of an internal freakout. My mind was failing to comprehend what was going on, and then I saw something that just told my head to shut up. The driver was staring at me through the rearview mirror, as if she had done something wrong, or I had done something wrong. See, now I knew I didn't appear physically distressed on the outside, but my gut told me they knew I was panicking. I stared back for maybe no more than a second before I tried to casually look out the window again. My heart dropped when I realized we were no longer driving through those grassy fields. Yet somehow, within the span of a minute, gotten the very same mountains I saw in the distance. We had started driving down a barely kept paved road through the forest, and I didn't know how to make sense of any of it. I looked back to the driver to find she was still looking at me in that mirror. You call her a bad driver. I shouldn't be joking about this, but I think you're supposed to keep your eyes on the road. I couldn't hide my confusion and distress anymore. I began to sweat and must have looked visibly nervous. I looked back at her in disbelief for what felt like an eternity until I saw a friendly smile creep across her face. I looked back out the window to see a small sign reading city limits. The worst part, I didn't even notice what stood next to it until maybe a few moments later. Now I know I saw a figure standing directly next to it. It stood maybe 8 feet tall, no clothing, just pale skin with a yellowish hint. Its arms dangled to the point where its long bony fingers rested against the ground. They looked like they could wrap around my arms twice over and just break it. It was hunched over like some kind of ape. Its legs were nowhere near proportional to its arms and torso, looking far too short to support itself, and it stood without hindrance, as if it never mattered. It had no mouth, but its face had only one pair of black eyes that were sunken into its skull. It stared at me as the shuttle passed. I know it did, and I don't know how I didn't see it immediately. I looked back at the driver one last time in horror. She was still wearing that smile she had put on just for me. I had to have been dreaming. I refused to accept that any of this was happening. The rumors couldn't be true. No matter how much I tried to deny it, no matter how hard I tried to wake up, she was staring at me with that fucking smile. She spoke for the first time, and it fucking terrified me. I heard her cackle and speak without moving her fucking teeth. And somehow, she sounded as if she was talking normally. Welcome to City 12, the city of creeps. Well, folks, that's the end of our first story. This story will be continued, and I hope you thoroughly have enjoyed. I apologize if my reading was dodgy at best. I made a few mistakes, but tried to make it seem as natural to what I wrote as possible. I do plan on having the next part up next Friday, so that's pretty much going to be it. If you like what you saw, folks, or like what you heard in this case, and you want to see more in the future, you know what to do. This has been Jimmy Quills, and I'll see you folks in the next one.